Hi guys, welcome to Novum, and welcome to a video I meant to post several months ago. I just had a few too many plates in the air and decided to get the witch video out first. Not to mention, this is a tricky video to package and get people to click on because it's a little bit all over the place. But there is some really cool stuff here that we need to go through. We're essentially going to be adding to my previous video, the complete guide to Midsommar, and I would suggest watching that first if, you have 6 hours to spare. We're going to be looking first at all the wonderful extras, things I missed that you guys contacted me with, which we'll be jumping through quite quickly. After that, we're going to look at a couple of corrections, things I got wrong in the video that I need to address. But following that, things are hopefully going to get a bit more thrilling as we dive back deep on some of our existing theories and remaining questions, by virtue of a recent interview with Vilhelm Blomgren, who plays Pelle, in which he is asked about our complete guide video and a couple of other very interesting things that help us push the conversation forwards a bit. So lots to get through, let's get started. And first up, all the fun facts I missed, starting with one I absolutely love, which was brought up by my viewer Siobhan O'Connor. And once I heard it, I could not believe I'd missed it. The yellow St. John's wort flowering in the walk up to the Hogger compound is a very clear allusion to the yellow brick road from The Wizard of Oz. As we know, there's a Wizard of Oz theme running throughout. Danny is Dorothy, with a very skewed interpretation of where home is by the end. Josh is the Tin Man, who's quite cold and calculating. He lacks a heart. Mark is the Scarecrow, not only lacking a brain, but also ending up stuffed with straw by the end of the film. And Christian is the Cowardly Lion, or maybe bear, lacking the courage to stop stringing Danny along. Of course they need a yellow brick road. Of course it was right in front of me. Unfortunately, my brain was melting at the time, so thank you, Siobhan, for that one. I absolutely love it. I've also seen people asking what role Pelle plays in our Oz coding, and I'd say he's probably the wizard, given he's the main one tricking the group. But I did have someone suggest that he's the tornado that transports Dorothy, which I love as well. Someone else suggested the tornado was Danny's grief, which is good too, and I think certainly fits with the turbulence on the plane, reflecting her anxious and troubled state. And I spoke to Kirby from Midsommar about this whole yellow brick road thing, and she suggested that the temple, the yellow almost pyramid we see burn up, was pretty close to the Emerald City too. And I actually agree. We've got the same sloping sides. It's irregular, but I think it's enough that it's there once your brain interprets the Oz allegory at work. And ultimately, it's where both journeys to Oz come to a climax, so I definitely like the mirroring there. And while we're on the subject of St. John's wort, I've also had many people informing me it's a natural antidepressant, which is something I most certainly glossed over and should have spent time on. Obviously, Danny is coming to the Hogger amidst intense depression, and even though we know it's very twisted, they do ultimately represent the cure for that depression, given that she's got this insane smile at the end. And combining that with the yellow brick road imagery all in one flower is a masterstroke on Ari Aster's part that I should have included in the original video. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you that have put work into this as well, and especially to Kirby. Months after the fact, she's still hitting me with new details, like this one, which I completely missed. We see one of the runes from the Hogger affect hiding in plain sight on this anti-immigration banner. It's the same rune we see on the interior walls of the temple, that we see very closely related to this underlying theme of nationalism and ethnic purity. If we go over to our handy Hogger affect translator, we can see it means conflict, anger, and war. And all of that fits perfectly, given we're seeing it here as flair on an anti-immigration banner, and we see it again during this ending moment where the mask seems to slip off and we see these sort of quasi-Nazi salutes. Alright, next up, and this is the other really big one I missed. I did not realize that Dan was a childhood megastar in Japan that influenced anime and manga and was in fact a whole vibe. I think we could put that down to me knowing almost nothing about anime, manga, or anything of that ilk. So big thanks to my viewer at FusselMeats5929 for posting this. The actor that plays Dan is believed to have influenced shoujo anime and manga to some extent. He was very popular in the 70s and 80s in Japan when he was a teenager/young adult and had a lot of female fans who admired him for his soft features and androgynous looks. It is believed that his popularity influenced the way male love interests in manga and anime aimed at young girls were drawn. There is a documentary about him called The Most Beautiful Boy in the World. And clearly Dan, or really Bjorn Anderson, is pretty well known because I've had a number of people make similar posts to me since. I have now watched the documentary, but I only had the previous quote to go on, and based on that, I really had no idea just how tragic it was going to be. Clearly Bjorn's had a very difficult life due to this intense fame he gained while still very young. I really don't want to tell you anymore. There's no way that I can do it the same justice here that the documentary does, so I'll just give it my wholehearted recommendation that even if you weren't interested in Midsommar or anime influences or anything of the sort, I still think you will find it to be be a very interesting watch and a well-made documentary. Next up, a very quick one from a viewer I won't name because I think they deleted their comment, which I loved and again makes so much sense now I see it, who told me that I missed that Ruby Rada can literally translate as bloodline. Now, I don't know if that's fully accurate. I don't even know if they were necessarily saying that was in Swedish, and so I can't really check what they meant. But luckily, it doesn't really matter because a row literally is a line. You know, you could describe a row of people as a line of people just like you could a column of people. And so regardless of translation, the pun was still in front of us the whole time. Ruby for blood, row for line. Very well played, Ari Aster. And very well played to the commenter. Either way, I know who you are and I value your input. Obviously, the other allusions I described in the guide still stand, namely that row is also a reference to how runic character sets are generally arranged, but I think given that we have characters using the word bloodline in the film, that this is almost certainly purposeful too. Next, we have this very recent one. I think it was within the last week someone told me about this, and we actually get to solve another mystery right here. A minor mystery, but one that had been quietly frustrating many people. Why Austin Powers? If you remember in the guide video, we looked at several options, ranging from Will Ferrell's tumble off a cliff to Swedish-made penis enlargers and Michael Myers, but we couldn't really draw a conclusion. So big thank you to my viewer Lisa D4732, who pointed to Ari Aster discussing this very reference on a podcast appearance, which I will play for you now.
Is there significance to the Austin Powers moment? I don't know if this is something you've talked about in other interviews.
I mean, that's just, again, that's an example of something that made me laugh. That I mean, I could ruin it by talking about it. And I will really quickly say that the Austin Powers thing, which was really just like a gut thing, apparently it's very big in Sweden. And so I've heard from a lot of Swedes that was right on the money.
Now there is something there, right? I could ruin it by talking about it. It does sound like Aster has a personal explanation he's not sharing. That could well be one of the possible motives we touched on, but I think we can also safely assume he just felt like that brand of weirdness fit with that moment. It's left field, oddball, and it grounds the Hogger in a world we share with them in a funny and unexpected way. And next, we have 3 bits of Midsommar folklore that I'd missed from a Swedish journalist called Minna Stroman. I hope I pronounced that right, who recently got in touch with myself and Kirby. She's got an upcoming research essay building on Kirby and our work on the film. Once that's published, there will be a link to it in the video description of this video, so you can read the whole thing. But I've read the current draft, and it's fantastic, and by her request, I'm sharing some details from it here. So first up is this shot, in which we see a couple of Hogger wringing out sheets into a bowl, which is an odd thing to be doing first thing in the morning. To quote Minna directly, "These sheets have collected dew overnight, as Midsummer's dew allegedly had some magical properties. So it was a common practice to collect the sheets or towels in the morning to wring the dew out into bowls to eventually bake into bread." Next up is Danny's attempt at eating the salted herring, which the Hogger tell her to eat a specific way, starting with the tail for good luck. And Minna was nice enough to translate the work of Ebbe Schön for me. He was an advisor on Midsommar traditions and magic for the film, so there really is no better source here. Sit backward on a chair, take a moderately sized salted herring and begin eating it slowly. But remember to start with the tail and end with the head, because in the world of magic, everything done backward yields better results. Then, no matter how thirsty you get, do not drink anything at all in the evening. Instead, go to bed and try to sleep. If you succeed, the matter is settled, for you will inevitably dream of a person approaching your bed and offering you something to drink. This person will be of the opposite sex. Pay close attention to their appearance so you can recognize their facial features, for it is precisely this person that fate has in store for you. So, as with lots of the other magic we see in the film, this is all about finding your perfect partner, and as with other attempts at magic we see Danny doing, she doesn't do it quite the right way, alluding to the doomed nature of her relationship. But the quote doesn't stop there. Ebbe goes on to say, "As always with this type of divination, the conditions are you must not participate in any festivities in the evening, and you must remain absolutely silent." And that brings me neatly to our third point. Maya does not talk during the film until her sex ritual with Christian is done and dusted. To quote Minna one last time, "The fact that Maya doesn't utter a word in the movie until after the deed is done serves not only to mystify her character, but to illustrate that she takes this ritual very seriously." In the director's cut, she's approached by Christian, but is reluctant to talk to him, and Ulla swoops in to speak for her. Now, I haven't been exhaustive with Minna's info here, so if you're interested in the magical traditions the film is pulling from, I'd really suggest keeping an eye out in this video description for when her work is published, because there's a bunch of fascinating details to discover. And last of the really awesome ones, again, I can't say who posted this, I think they may have deleted their comment too. I did search for a while, but apologies if I missed it. I don't think I made clear the link between Terry's eye and Odin losing his eye, or if I did, it was far too brief. I think I focused on Terry's clouded vision and then Odin when I got to Josh, but yes, we can absolutely see Terry's single clouded eye as an allusion to the sacrifice she's making being similar to Odin plucking his eye out. They're both self-destructive acts, sacrifices they choose to make, really in their own name, and there is perhaps an allusion to her gaining knowledge in or of the beyond. We have this repeated motif of her sticking around in Danny's mind, in her dreams and hallucinations, and at the end we see this sort of manifesting of her amongst nature. So I don't hate the idea that maybe Terry did achieve some sort of higher state of being, although given the film's lore, I think that would very much be as part of returning to the natural cycle. And now, reasonably quickly, we have to deal with the things I got wrong and how, if at all, that changes things. So firstly, I said that Gautrek's saga, the Icelandic saga that popularized the Atestapan, was produced in the 2nd century, which it most certainly was not, because Iceland didn't exist then. Well, the landmass did, but at that point there weren't any people stood on it, and there wouldn't be for quite a while. The saga is in fact from the 13th century. Unfortunately, that was just a typo that made it all the way through editing, because, as I mentioned before, my brain was becoming soup. And another error, in a similar vein, my pronunciation of Tuila County, which I have since come to learn is pronounced Tuila and not Thule. My apologies to the people of Tuila for that one, and apologies if I just got it wrong again. I'm honestly not sure. But then we have a more major mistake. I said the Arders family home was in Utah, and it is, in reality, that's where this was filmed, but in the film it's intended to be Minnesota. This is by far the worst mistake, absolutely took everything I had not releasing a video on it right away, and thank you to the people who pointed out the error. Now, I don't think that takes much away from what I was saying about Ari Aster using Utah as a filming location in 2 films heavily concerned with cults. Well, maybe a little bit, but far more importantly, does it affect everything I was saying about Danny potentially having Swedish ancestry, given that I linked the location of Utah with Swedish immigration? And the answer is no, not at all. In fact, it actually improves on the theory, given that Minnesota saw far more Scandinavian immigration than Utah did. In fact, Minnesota is the state that saw the most Swedish immigration to America. To quote the Minnesota Historical Society, Minnesota became the most Swedish of all states, with Swedish Americans constituting more than 12% of Minnesota's population in 1910. And that presence is clearly a proud part of state history, given their state football team is the Minnesota Vikings. So purposefully putting Danny there is an even more intentional nod towards her potential Swedish ancestry than Utah would have been, which is pretty awesome, and I think validates theories on her ancestry that little bit more. So yes, a mistake, but a happy one because the correction proves the point even further. That's everything easy out of the way. Let's slow down now and move on to some deeper rabbit holes. And I want to draw your attention to a recent interview with the immensely talented Vilhelm Blomgren. This comes from the podcast Pop Culture with Joseph, and I'll leave a link to it in the video description. But Joseph also handily provided a Reddit transcript to go off for people like me who cannot speak Swedish. Now, I don't want to spoil Joseph's interview for you, it's well worth a listen or a read, but there are a few details that I do want to pick up on because they concern things we discussed in the guide. These are going to get more exciting as we go through, but first let's start with something small. We've got Vilhelm describing Ari Aster's direction during this scene. If you watch the guide, you'll remember I said it was almost like a comparison of their Viking conquests, the babes they have dragged back, to use Josh's terminology. And that's exactly what is happening, but take a look at this quote from Vilhelm on what Ari Aster said to him while shooting this scene. "You're both very happy to see each other, but you're also presenting your harvest." Which is just very fitting language that I really enjoyed, and obviously terrifying, especially because, like everything Hogger, a harvest is seasonal. It suggests that the Hogger have an annual supply of people, which we know they do to some degree, but this implies Pelle and Ingemar are pretty comfortable with that, and maybe it's happening a bit more often than we thought. And obviously that's just direction and not movie canon. It's also perhaps Vilhelm paraphrasing Ari Aster from memory, but I loved the choice of language, and I still thought it had enough of Asta's input there that it was worth mentioning. Most importantly though, it does confirm that what we thought was happening here, namely their competitive comparing of new blood, is definitely happening. And the next question from Joseph is an absolute banger. Did Pelle's parents really burn up in a fire, or was he just manipulating Danny? And if they did burn up, was this a ritual sacrifice made by the Hauger? And Vilhelm says there was nothing in the script about it, but his own personal belief was that this was a sacrificial ritual. Now, again, we can't say it's just canon now, but I think it was already looking like a fair bet this wasn't an accidental fire. Really, this is just further confirmation. We know the Midsommar ritual we see in the film is every 90 years, so they definitely didn't burn up there. So this also helps us confirm that there are other Hauger sacrifices happening on other occasions for other reasons. Again, I think this was a fair presumption either way, given how comfortable the Hauger seem to be with much of the killing and the lying preceding the killing. Clearly some of them, at least, have had experience with ritual sacrifice in their lifetimes beyond the Attestapan, especially given none of them would have been alive during the previous 90-year Midsommar festivities. So I don't think that changes anything groundbreaking in terms of what we know about the Hauger, but it is perhaps the closest we'll ever get to an answer about Pelle's parents, and it means that, as far as the performance was concerned, Pelle wasn't lying to Danny to manipulate her. He was manipulating her, but he wasn't lying to do so. And then, and this is very weird to be saying, the next question is Vilhelm aware of a 7-hour video on Midsommar, and specifically my Oh God No, Jesus No theory about Inga and Ulf? And to my surprise, Vilhelm was at least aware of the video, so minor panic attack for me there. And just to remind you about the Oh God Jesus No Inga theory, it's not something that's at all set in stone, it's just one reading of some of the background weirdness during the third act. I actually had 3 possible explanations here, and this was the really wild one, but also the one that didn't leave any logic gaps or potential inconsistencies. It's just really in-depth and more than a bit weird. And the theory is essentially that Inga is Ulf's daughter by blood, which explains why she seems to have this close relationship with him where she's convinced she can calm him down from being actively murderous, and that she is wearing this devilish red phallic fertility horn cornicello thing, and acting strangely towards Ulf, and crying on her own, not feeling in synchronicity with the rest of the Hauger hive mind towards the end, because she's been quietly selected for a bit of father-daughter new incest prophet conception time prior to Ulf's sacrifice. I'll say that again. Father-daughter new incest prophet conception time. Now, I realize that's a lot to take in. It's a very out there theory that's only useful if you absolutely want to explain literally everything. Although it could also potentially be one day used as evidence for declaring me criminally insane. It has now been discussed with 2 members of the cast, so I'm expecting a restraining order very soon. So if this is all too much to take in, don't worry. The simpler answer to all of this is that Inga's either being used by Ulf to lead Mark along, or that simply she did sleep with him and now is upset by Ulf having killed him. Ari Aster has hinted along these lines in interviews, saying there's a suggestion they slept together. But that's artfully vague, and neither of those explanations hold up to really close scrutiny. Check out the guide if you want the full explainer, but as you might have guessed, it gets weird. Back to the interview, and Wilhelm's reply to this question is tactful. He didn't say I was concerning or deranged or a danger to others like all those people on the train, so I'm taking that as a win. And he did confirm, just like Julia Ragnarsson did, that Inga did not have any feelings for Mark and was just stringing him along. And that's enough for me to say we can throw away the possibility that she's just torn up about Mark being killed. So that's one of 3 possible explanations ruled out. Inga did not like Mark. So either she's very sad about losing Ulf, and that's manifesting in, let's say, awkward ways, or something has happened off-screen along the lines of what I'm discussing. But we did ultimately rule out Theory 2 in the guide video as well, mainly because they're too far apart in age for Hauger breeding norms, and there's really no supporting evidence for it beyond this need to explain away Inga's odd behavior. And if you remember the guide video, Julia did say my theory made sense and sounded familiar. So it's up to you, but I actually think this did get a step closer to it being verified. But there are a couple more things Vilhelm mentions here. Firstly, that Inga's facial injury definitely comes from smashing her face into the maple. We were already pretty clear on that, but it's good to have it doubly confirmed because now we could say for sure there wasn't any kind of a scuffle between her and Mark. But he also says that Ingemar and Ulf choose to sacrifice themselves because they feel disappointed in their own behavior. Ulf because of anger and Ingemar because of lust. Now, my first instinct was that maybe something changed in the edit here because we've got this scene of Ulf being told something by an elder and getting visibly upset. We then have Valentin saying it's a big week for him. And when you're watching that, you're supposed to think he's the most devout Hauger, this is the most important date in the calendar, and his emotions are running high because of recent tree peeing. But you then find out pretty quickly he's going to be sacrificed, and suddenly it makes more sense. He's crying because his time is at an end. But if what Vilhelm is saying is accurate here, that Ulf has fully chosen to die, that wouldn't be something that had him suddenly bursting into tears. But you know what would? Some enforced father-daughter, let's make an incest profit time. Because if Ulf is really truly self-electing for this sacrifice, then his surprised and upset reaction here doesn't make total sense. And that would leave us with just one current theory to explain all these strange events. However, let's not get too excited because there is a hitch here. During the selection ceremony, Sten says, Ingemar and Ulf, you have brought outside offerings, thus volunteering your own bodies. And this seems like a pretty black and white explainer. They brought outside offerings and subsequently have volunteered through doing that. And so we have an iffy form of volunteering here, which we've known from the jump. So clearly that could still be why Ulf is having this emotional reaction. He has been volunteered, but by a third party. I suppose we could say by the doctrine of the Hogger. But that doesn't quite fit with what Vilhelm said. It wouldn't really fit with Ulf either, given he seems quite willing to die and devoutly believes what the Hogger are pushing. So maybe, and I did only come up with that theory because it was the only key that seemed to fit the lock. I'm not going to say that it's for sure, because I'm not sure, and ultimately this is the very definition of ambiguous. But we can definitely say that we're one step closer to the truth, with seemingly only one explanation fitting without at least some small amount of contradiction. But even though it's now that little bit more verified, that's also pretty much where we left it last time. So I had to think outside the box a bit, and I knew there was one more thing that could potentially help this theory over the line. Something that's missing from the movie, yet I felt must be present. Were the actors made aware of any potential biological links between themselves and other members of the Hogger? Because, to my mind, that would need to be the case for this theory to be plausible. Obviously, the Hogger, concerned with their bloodlines, concerned with inbreeding, they are related to each other, at the very least in well-isolated pockets. Biological relations must abound, but other than Pelle's parents, we don't really ever have them made explicit. Now, if there was never any such discussion behind the scenes, then it would make a theory like this not impossible, but far more unlikely given that it relies on Ulf and Inga being related. And I actually have been able to confirm that. We'll get to exactly how in a moment, but for now, yes, there were behind-the-scenes suggestions about potential family relations within the Hogger. I only know of one thus far, specifically Martin Karlqvist's suggestion to the actor who played Evert that Dan may have been a mentor or perhaps grandfather figure to him. This being the reasoning they both have long hair to allude to a deeper or rather different kind of connection between them. I think we can also say having him hammer fatality his own granddad adds to everything I was saying about this scene and the cyclic repetition between generations that we see alluded to between Danny and Dan, and Pelle and Dan, and most crucially Danny and Dan's jumping buddy Ilva, who seems to be some kind of past and future reflection of her, that cycles, patterns are repeating through us and through nature in a never-ending fractal of repeated mistakes and self-fulfilling prophecies. And if we're having discussions on set about Dan potentially being Evert's grandfather, and Julia Ragnarsson said the thought of Ulf as her father sounded familiar, then I can't see any reason why this isn't at least possible. I doubt we'll ever be able to fully confirm this horrendous and unnecessary theory, but at the very least, it seems to be holding up the more we discover. Now, next up in the interview is the big question, really the main reason I'm making this video. Was this person holding the mallet that delivers the final blow to Josh, was it Pelle? I thought it was Pelle, primarily because to me it looked like a blurred Pelle. They've got a light beard, same outfit, same hair color, but also because Pelle very clearly doesn't like Josh, and also because we see him working in the garden and we'll see Josh buried upside down there. And I was most definitely wrong about that, which thankfully I'd left room for, because truly I didn't know. So let's look at the interview quote directly. Joseph asks, was it Pelle that killed Josh? And Vilhelm replies, no. Or was it? It could have been. You see me working at the gardens in some other scene, and I was pretty annoyed with him, wasn't I? And just to be clear, we don't see Josh fully die. So even though I'm saying all this, there is still room for Pelle to have done something off camera. But truthfully, I think this is just Vilhelm being tactful and leaving room for differing interpretations, which is absolutely valid, and certainly he's not ruling out the theory he had some form of a hand in it. Luckily for us, Joseph followed up with, but is it you that we see in the cabin when he gets attacked? And Vilhelm replies, no, that wasn't me. That was one of the older ones. I think it's the same guy that Josh talks with earlier about the Futhark. I probably was the one that buried him, however. Now, I think he means the Ruby Rada there, not the Futhark, which would mean he's suggesting he thinks it's Arn, and I don't think it is Arn, purely because it's not white hair and the elders dress a little bit differently, and we can tell this character has the younger, casual outfit on like we see Pelle wearing. But whoever it is, this confirms it most definitely isn't Pelle, and that means we do have another mystery on our hands. So I went back to the drawing board, by which I mean I asked Kirby, given that she's an absolute fountain of knowledge, and together we shortlisted 3 possibilities, 2 of which we don't actually have character names for. The first being someone Kirby has dubbed Shovel Guy. We can see him shoveling out Dan and Ilva's ashes following their sacrifice. That's her top pick based on who she thinks this blur man looks like. She also pointed to this guy, who we see helping Christian out of the wheelchair. We'll call him Strongman, given we mainly see him lifting Christian. This guy is probably my top pick. I think that's the best resemblance we have. But I also thought this looked more like Pelle, so perhaps my facial recognition isn't the best thing to go on. And then lastly we have Evert, who is the rather strapping Hogger we see swinging the final mallet blow at the Etterstoop. And I've included him because he's a guy we see holding and swinging a mallet. It's just good mirroring. I don't think Blurman looks particularly like Evert, but I'm also not trusting my eyes here given it is very blurry. We see him malleting people, and we're trying to figure out who does some malleting here, so we'll include him even though it's unlikely. Now, it could be one of them. I think it's likely it is one of them because we're running out of suspects, but there is a chance it could still be someone else we haven't considered. So from there, what can we do to identify this blur-faced, Josh-murdering criminal? Well, just like with the Inga theory, I thought the best route was to get in touch with them directly and ask them. If they were stood there holding a mallet, then they'd surely remember. Now, unfortunately, neither Kirby nor I have any idea who Shovel Guy is, and subsequently what the actor's name is. He will certainly be credited, but not as an actor and character name that we can easily line up together. As for Evert though, we have better luck. And by better luck, I mean Kirby had already done the work for me in the form of her Meet the Hogger project. He's played by Maximilian Martin, and I was able to get in touch with Max and ask him some questions, which was tremendously helpful because first and foremost, it wasn't him holding the mallet, so that's 1 out of 3, ruled out right out of the gate. And beyond that, he told me a bunch of awesome behind-the-scenes information. As you may have deduced, he told me about his character's potential familial relation to Dan, a lot about the Attestapan malleting, but also just general stuff. And that's actually another reason I got in touch with Max, because Kirby had told me he was able to speak Hungarian, Swedish, and English, which made him invaluable on set in communicating between the Swedish and Hungarian elements of cast and crew. For those that don't know, the film is set in Sweden, but filmed in Hungary, mainly due to budgetary reasons. Now, there's a lot of really cool stuff that Max shared with me that we might get to in future, but I want to stay on topic with what he shared regarding Blurface Mallet Man's identity. So firstly, we have 4 people going up to hammer Dan after his fall. We have Mats overseeing the process. We have Evert, or Max, who finishes the process. And prior to that, we have Majvor and this guy who delivers the first blow. And I can't show you it on YouTube, but we see this guy taking a swing at Dan that fully connects. According to Max, however, this was actually a soft mallet that stopped prior to hitting Dan. And to make sure that process was safely done, this guy is actually a Hungarian stuntman. That piqued my interest because, as it turns out, Strongman, he just so happens to be a Hungarian stuntman. Now, Shovel Guy could also very likely be a Hungarian stuntman, but we don't know that for sure because at present we can't identify him. Now, neither of them are this particular Hungarian stuntman, and this Hungarian stuntman almost certainly isn't Blurface Mallet Man, given he has whitish hair too. But it does mean that when mallet stuff is happening, they are using Hungarian stuntmen, at least for moments where we have actors getting the mallet swung at them, which is kind of what happens with William Jackson Harper during the scene in question. Now, Max had a few possible suggestions as to who he thought made sense plot-wise. Perhaps Mats, given he oversaw the malleting, perhaps Inga, but we can rule them out because, again, Mats wears this slightly different elder outfit and has white hair, and I think we can say the figure is definitely male, so Inga's out. But Max's main suggestion was that it was probably a stuntman. So obviously the next thing I asked him, do you think it could have been Strongman? And I showed him this image. He wasn't able to confirm that, but he did give us some more information about Strongman. He described him as a Hungarian extra, but from what I've been able to gather, he does do stunt work and acting. And he was there primarily as a stand-in for Jack Rayner, given they're approximately the same height and build. So for most of the time, he's going to be on set in similar clothes to what Jack Rayner was wearing. But Max does describe a few days where he was dressed up as a white Hogger. White in this sense referring to this outfit we see him wearing. So it's certainly possible it's him, and he does fit the bill of being a Hungarian stuntman, and it being Hungarian stuntmen swinging the mallet near people. Now, all of that might be true about Shovel Guy too, we don't know. I do know Strongman's social media, his name and YouTube channel and so on, but I'm not detailing that here because I've tried to get in touch with him several times and not had any response. So we have to respect that, and I don't want to say it here and have people pestering him. There are other avenues we can explore without imposing on people's privacy and time. But I suppose at this point, the question then becomes, if it's probably one of these two, and neither of them ever speak on screen, does it really make a difference? Does it even matter? And to that, all I have to say is, you must be fucking new around here, because despite not remotely understanding why this is important to me, for some reason I will not rest until we have an answer. So, annoyingly, we have to end this one with a mystery, for now. We know a lot more than we did, thanks to Vilhelm and Max, but we don't have a conclusion yet. Still, if you can't tell, I'm quite invested in getting to the bottom of this. I guess the best next step is that I'd love to hear from all of you and who you think it might be based purely on your facial recognition. I'll be honest, this still really looks like Pelle to me, so my failing eyes cannot be trusted. And beyond that, I just have to go back to the drawing board. Someone, more than a few people, know who this is for sure. And despite it almost certainly not really adding anything at this point, I want to know. I figure some of you might want to know too. We need to get justice for Josh. So I'm going to keep trying. I'm already doing more behind the scenes to try and find out, but let me say publicly, if you have information connected to this blur-faced man, if you perhaps are this blur-faced man, please get in touch and let me know. My fiance is starting to get really mad about all the red string and pin boards in our living room. Before we wrap up here though, I just want to reiterate, there is a whole interview beyond the parts I've discussed here. There are many other interesting tidbits there, especially regarding Pelle and Danny, so if you love this stuff like I do, please go check that out. I've linked the original and the transcript in the video description. There is one last thing I'd like to say about the interview though, and that's that years and years later, Vilhelm is still talking about the Hogger quite reverently. Ari Aster does this too. In fact, every member of the cast I've seen discuss them seem to be very fond and very respectful of the Hogger. I know a lot of this reverence comes from being tactical, being good at PR, but there are positive influences to the Hogger, and this is a real place after all. There's also a kind of magic to it, the sense that they did create something really special, and it comes out in these moments of discussion just how invested they were in creating a living, breathing Hogger for this film. No matter how ugly and horrible their beliefs and behaviors might be, they're close, they are loving, and I think that really shines through when you hear the actors talk about their experiences. Okay. That's everything for this video, guys. I'm diving right back into Beau is Afraid. I'm still mainly in the research phase, but there's stuff starting to be written down. In the meantime, please go check out The Complete Guide to the Witch if you haven't seen it. If you have and you want more content from me right now, then on Patreon we've got 4 hours on The Substance, 6 hours on True Detective, we've got Nosferatu reactions, Blood Meridian discussion, an Ask Me Anything video, several hours on Longlegs and the same on Suspiria as well as all the uncensored Complete Guide videos. A huge thank you to everyone that is supporting me there already. You guys are making it possible for me to spend the time making these ludicrous guide videos the way they deserve to be made. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is everything. Thank you to everyone that's commented, that's helped with research, and especially to those who are carrying the torch and continuing to investigate this beautiful film. Beau is Afraid is going to be a big one, even by our standards, so I might see you again sometime soon with a little surprise before that. Peace.